This video is going to piss some people off. If your favorite player is on this list, I'm very sorry, but I'm going over 10 overvalued players in 2025 fantasy football drafts. Guys, I believe their ADP is just too high. Don't blame me, blame the player's average draft position. But let's not waste your time. Let's hop right into 10 overvalued players in 2025 fantasy football. First guy I'm going to look at, Ashton Jeanty of the Las Vegas Raiders. The ADP for Jeanty is just insane. He's going as the 10th overall player in fantasy drafts, the RB4 off the board. This is too high for a rookie in this Raiders offense. I talked about him on a must-avoid video, and this has nothing to do with Ashton Jeanty's talent. Obviously, a great prospect coming out of Boise State. Has all to do with the landing spot and the historical finishes we've seen from recent round one running backs in fantasy football their rookie season. The most recent round one running backs we've seen, Bijan Robinson in his rookie season, he finishes as RB17 on a points per game basis. Jahmyr Gibbs, one of our higher finishes, RB8 on a points per game basis. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, RB20. Najee Harris, he finishes RB6, but that was mostly due to Ben Roethlisberger dumping the ball off nonstop, given the fact that he just couldn't move in the pocket. And most notably, Josh Jacobs in his rookie season with the Raiders, he finishes RB15 on a points per game basis. So none of these guys finish in the top five their rookie season, yet Ashton Jeanty going as the fourth running back off the board, pick number 10 overall. And if it was to a great offense, I would be slamming Ashton Jeanty here. But this Raiders team, last year, they were the worst rushing offense in the National Football League. You can blame a lack of talent for that, but I don't think that's the only issue with the Raiders. Like I said, the lowest rushing total in the league, the third fewest rushing attempts last season, the lowest yards per carry. While I do believe in the long-term potential of Ashton Jeanty, this year in his rookie campaign, I don't want to pay a top 10 pick to draft him, especially when the strength of schedule for the Raiders, specifically the running back strength of schedule, 8th hardest in the National Football League this year. Most notably, the playoff stretch for Ashton Jeanty, weeks 15 and 16. He's facing the Houston Texans and the Philadelphia Eagles, just the second and third fewest touchdowns allowed last year to running backs across the league. So a brutal regular season for Jeanty, capped off with a terrible playoff schedule in those first 2 weeks of the fantasy football playoffs. Just too rich for pick 10 in my opinion. My next running back also being drafted way too high, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. His average draft position is at the end of the second round, running back 8 off the board. But how many people would be surprised if I said Jonathan Taylor from weeks 1 through 15 was RB19 on a points per game basis? Well, believe it or not, that is a true statement. RB19 for the entire fantasy football regular season last year. Yet he's going as RB8 off the board. Now, his points per game numbers were dramatically inflated from the last 3 games of the regular season, where Jonathan Taylor went absolutely nuclear against the Tennessee Titans, Jacksonville Jaguars, and New York Giants. What do those 3 teams have in common? They picked at the top of the draft 3 of the worst teams in the NFL last year. This season, the schedule is much more difficult for Jonathan Taylor. He has the 5th hardest strength of schedule for the running back position. If he doesn't have these bottom feeder teams to run all over, Jonathan Taylor, I believe, is going to struggle in 2025, especially with the quarterback play being abysmal this upcoming season. Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson fighting for the QB1 spot. What do these guys have in common? They're mobile, they don't check down to the running back, and they are below average quarterbacks in the NFL. I'm staying away from Jonathan Taylor this year in fantasy. First wide receiver on the list today, Xavier Worthy, the second-year wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. His ADP is wide receiver 23 in drafts this season. While many people believe he's on a breakout path based on what he did last year, from weeks 1 through 17, yes, that's the entire season in fantasy football, he finished as wide receiver 40 on a points per game basis. And that's with Rashee Rice missing basically the whole year, Hollywood Brown missing basically the whole year, and Isaiah Pacheco going down with a knee injury. So when the only other options in this Kansas City offense are what's left of Kareem Hunt, DeAndre Hopkins, and Travis Kelce, and Xavier Worthy still only finishes as wide receiver 40 on a points per game basis, I'm not drafting him at wide receiver 23 this year. With this team reloading across the board, Hollywood Brown is back, Rashee Rice looks to be back, Pacheco is back, Xavier Worthy, I don't want to be misled by some late production in the Super Bowl. I'm not drafting him at wide receiver 23. This guy's efficiency was pretty bad last year. His average depth of target ranked 77th in the National Football League, and his yards per route run ranked 76th. This guy was not efficient by any means. Now he's in a crowded offense. I cannot waste a pick in the early middle rounds on Xavier Worthy. Next wide receiver is Zay Flowers for the Baltimore Ravens. Also had him on a do not draft video in a year where Lamar Jackson has career numbers across the board, 41 touchdown passes, over 4,000 passing yards. Zay Flowers, as the wide receiver 1 in Baltimore, finished as wide receiver 36 on a points per game basis. Lamar Jackson outperforms his numbers from his MVP years, and Zay Flowers is still a bottom tier wide receiver 3 in fantasy football. Yet this year you're drafting him at ADP 28. This Ravens offense is built on the ground. They had the second fewest passing attempts last year. Zay Flowers actually had less catches in year 2 than he did his rookie campaign. And now they bring in DeAndre Hopkins to be a red zone threat. Zay Flowers just doesn't have the capability to do damage in the red zone with guys like Mark Andrews, Derrick Henry, and now DeAndre Hopkins flooding that team on offense. Zay Flowers only able to finish as a bottom tier wide receiver 3 in a season where the Ravens have an unbelievable offensive outburst. I will not be drafting him this upcoming year when I have to pay a higher price tag on him than where he finished last season. Now this next player might ruffle some feathers as well. Joe Mixon, I believe he's being overvalued in drafts. This is a guy that is already dealing with injuries. He's supposedly going to be ready at some point in training camp, just not something you like to see. And now he's dealing with Nick Chubb as added competition in the backfield. Well, I don't think Nick Chubb's going to play a huge role in this offense. It's something to consider because Nick Chubb's not catching passes in Houston. He's going to get at least some work. But more importantly, this Houston Texans team, the outlook on the offensive line does not look great at this current moment. They are projected the worst offensive line in the National Football League. So he's got a bad offensive line. Now he's splitting carries with Nick Chubb, and he faces the 4th hardest strength of schedule for the running back position. Injury concerns, more added competition, horrible offensive line, and a bad schedule. These bring me some concern in fantasy drafting Joe Mixon this year. Jerry Jeudy's my next wide receiver I will not be taking in fantasy. Jerry Jeudy's been in the league for a decent amount of time now, and last season was the first time he eclipsed 1,000 yards receiving. After 7 weeks last year, Jerry Jeudy was ranked as the wide receiver 67 on a points per game basis, doing literally nothing before Amari Cooper was traded. And I don't know if y'all saw Amari Cooper, but last year, once he was on the Bills, the guy looked like dust. He's not even on a team yet. So if what's left of Amari Cooper is the reason Jerry Jeudy couldn't perform, that gives me concern on where he is as a player. But it's not only that. 5 of Jeudy's 6 biggest games last year came once Cedric Tillman left with the concussion injury, which kept him out the remainder of this season. All this production from Jeudy is backloaded with Jameis Winston at quarterback throwing the ball all over the yard while Cedric Tillman's out with concussion, because Cedric Tillman was the wide receiver 1 once Amari Cooper was traded. Nearly 20% of Jeudy's production came in one singular game last year with Jameis Winston. And once Winston was benched, Jerry Jeudy's numbers came back to reality. He was averaging a little over 9 fantasy points per game. At ADP 62 overall, there are just so many options I would much rather draft than Jerry Jeudy. For a guy who's only been productive when Jameis Winston's been his quarterback, I will not be drafting him. Next player is our first quarterback, Baker Mayfield, going as QB7 off the board. I can't deny it, Baker Mayfield had an unbelievable season last year. But before last year, Baker Mayfield had never finished above QB17 on a points per game basis. Last year, he erupts with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. But to draft him at QB4 when he loses his offensive coordinator to Jacksonville, I'm not sure if Baker can replicate those statistics, especially when he's having career highs across the board. Let's not forget his weapons are a year older. Mike Evans will be 32 this season. Chris Godwin dealing with some injuries. I like Chris Godwin in fantasy, but we can't overlook the injury he sustained last year. What will we have left of Chris Godwin and 32-year-old Mike Evans in an offense that loses its play caller, its offensive coordinator? Baker Mayfield has a lot of red flags this year. I would much rather wait a couple rounds and draft guys like Kyler Murray, Justin Fields, Drake May. There's so much upside with these rushing quarterbacks later in the drafts. I think spending one on Baker Mayfield is a mistake, especially when he loses his left tackle, who is going to miss a significant amount of time with a knee injury. Tristan Wirfs, an all-pro left tackle. That is something we need to consider. At QB7, I'm going to pass. I will wait on quarterback if I don't have one in that range. My next player, running back Tony Pollard for the Tennessee Titans. Last year, he finished as running back 22 on a points per game basis. Now his ADP is running back 27. So you might think that's value for a guy getting him cheaper in drafts this year. But I am not here to say that. I believe there is a bigger competition than what people expect in Tennessee. I think Tajay Spears is going to play a big role in this offense. I don't think we can just give Tony Pollard the lead back role and the red zone role. Last year, he had the fewest carries inside the 5-yard line out of all starting running backs in the NFL. He only had one more carry inside the 5 than Tajay Spears, who missed 5 games from injury. Spears was riddled with injury all year long, but at times, Spears looked to be a more efficient back than Pollard. I don't see the upside with Tony Pollard in a running back by committee in an offense that doesn't project to be very good this year. The Titans, while they might be better than they were last year, their projected win total is 6.5. So it's not like this is going to be a guns a-blazing offense with a mediocre to below average offense with a running back by committee and a guy in Tony Pollard that doesn't scream supreme talent. This is a guy in this part of the draft I think we need to be avoiding, even at RB27. I just don't see upside for him to crack into the top 20. And I would much rather get Tajay Spears where he's going in drafts for a guy that looked better than Pollard when he was healthy. My next wide receiver, I don't really have a great argument here on Deebo Samuel to avoid. It just seems like Deebo Samuel is cooked at this point. I mean, last year in San Francisco, he finished as wide receiver 46 on a points per game basis. This was in a year where Brandon Ayuk was out with time. Christian McCaffrey basically missed the entire season. The top 2 weapons in that offense missed a majority of the year, and Deebo is still only wide receiver 46. It just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, all the noise in the community suggests Deebo Samuel is just done. He's past his prime. It was a great run for Deebo, but I just think you're wasting a pick here on a guy that looked to be toast at the end of last year. The last 7 games of the regular season, he only had more than 22 receiving yards one time. With very little competition, he still couldn't perform in San Francisco. Even at wide receiver 39, I just don't think there's any upside to Deebo Samuel when he was outside the top 40 wide receivers last year in San Francisco. My last player, Najee Harris, around pick 100 in your fantasy drafts. Yes, he goes late in fantasy, but I think you're just wasting a pick here. If you want a handcuff running back, just wait a couple rounds and draft any number of handcuffs that are available. Najee Harris, last year, he finished as RB25 on a points per game basis, which isn't terrible. But let's consider the fact that he had the 7th most carries in the National Football League, and you still only finished as RB25. And that's when he was dealing with Jalen Warren as his competition in Pittsburgh. Now he goes to Los Angeles, where Omarion Hampton is a supreme talent compared to the likes of Jalen Warren. I think if you want a running back that's going to play second fiddle to another guy, you can get one much cheaper in drafts. Najee Harris, we've seen it for multiple years now, just not very elusive, not efficient. He relies on supreme volume to pay dividends in fantasy, and I don't think he's getting that for the Chargers. Once Hampton takes off, this will be his backfield sooner rather than later. So I think you're wasting a pick on the most expensive handcuff in fantasy football, basically, in Najee Harris. But those are 10 guys I believe are overvalued in fantasy football drafts currently. Let me know. I know there's at least one person on this list that is going to ruffle feathers with everyone watching. Let me know who you disagree with. Who are you drafting here that I am fading? Let me know in the comment section. Appreciate you guys watching. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more fantasy football content. But that's going to do it here. We appreciate you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next week with another episode of the Fantasy Birds.